Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's web seminar, Strategies to Digitally Transform Your ITSM to Deliver Value, sponsored by GoTo Group and featuring Jay LaCroix and Hal Prather as our speakers. I'm your host from TechWell, Beth Romanek. Thanks for joining us. Before I hand it over to our speakers, let me explain this console you see in front of you. All three panels on your screen can be moved around and resized. At the bottom of your console, you'll also see a widget toolbar. By clicking the Handouts widget in the middle, the one that looks like a piece of paper, you can download a PDF of the speaker's slides today. If you have any technical issues, please let us know by typing in that questions and answers panel on the left. This is also how you can ask the speakers questions. We'll have a Q&A session at the end, so feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. And finally, for your best viewing experience, please close any unnecessary applications you have running in the background. We are recording this web seminar, and it will be made available later to watch on demand. Once the recording is ready, you'll get an email with instructions about how you can watch the presentation again. And with that, I would like to hand it over to our GoTo Group speakers.
Great. Well, thank you, Beth. As we get in today, to talk about strategies to digitally transform your IT service management to deliver value. I'm Hal Prather with GoTo Group. GoTo Group is a Atlassian Platinum solution partner. And we really help people get more value out of their products and processes as they go to deliver value throughout the entire life cycle of what they do. I'm a senior consultant with GoTo Group and have been working in this capacity for about 5 or 6 years now. Prior to that, I worked as a software development director and took a lot of legacy applications to the web. And Jay, I'll let you do your intro.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jay LaCroix. I'm the Director of Cloud Services for GoTo Group. My team and I manage and support cloud-hosted infrastructure as well as internal infrastructure. Basically, we do all the things when it comes to IT. We love it. In addition to my primary role at GoTo Group, I also own and maintain Learn Linux TV, a popular YouTube channel that is all about Linux, and it just hit 10 million views and is actually approaching 100,000 subscribers. So I guess, there's a lot of people out there crazy about technology like we are. And then moving on from there, strategies to digitally transform your ITSM to deliver value. So basically, let's see. There you go. Sorry, a little technical glitch there, guys. So, right, so getting started here. We are all in this together. So when it comes to technology, especially when you have an IT organization or you are an IT organization, getting everybody together on the same page, all the processes synchronized, departments working together, is going to be a recurring thread throughout this presentation. And it is a very important thing because everyone has creativity, ideas, and every department, every person is a wheel in the cog, so to speak. So it's important, we're all in this together, we're all working on the same thing, we're helping each other out, and that's going to be the first most important thing to keep in mind as we go through the presentation. And another thing that we're going to talk about in addition to that is where we have been, because history has a way of repeating itself when you are taking a look at what has came before, successes that you've had, failures that you've had, because recognizing that is important as well. Understanding where you have been is going to be very important to understand where we are going. And where we are going is going to be another topic that we will be discussing. So basically, what's the path forward? And the path forward seems to change every day in IT, but some of the core concepts are always the same. It's basically streamlining processes, making things work better, run more efficiently, and that's actually very important as well. And you can't really go anywhere if you don't have a modern tool chain and a workflow that basically makes it all work. You need a workflow that just defines the processes, the order of operations for a successful implementation, integration, software product, things like that. So it all works together, and those are the topics that we will be discussing in this presentation. And, like I mentioned, we are all in this together. And that's our first topic here. So digital transformation involves everyone in an organization. Gartner defines digital transformation as the use of digital technologies to change a business model and provide a new revenue and value-producing opportunities. It is the process of moving to a digital business. McKinsey helps us break it down even further into our discussion today by placing 3 attributes to a digital transformation: creating value at the new frontiers of the business world, creating value in the processes that execute a vision of customer experiences, and building foundational capabilities that support the entire infrastructure.
Yeah, so as we move into this and talk about how we're all in this together, we want to look at IT from the inside out and look at how IT can become a vital part of delivering value along with the business. So many of you may be familiar with the guiding principles that came out a couple of years back, 4 or 5 years ago now. And we saw that published from Axios and ITIL. And now in ITIL 4, we have 7 guiding principles that really direct us in this journey. These are meant to not necessarily be applied in order if you haven't seen these before. But this is a slight decrease in the number of principles that are there. So now you see these 7. We'll be walking through these and how they all really kind of guide and direct you throughout the entire cycle. So traditionally, when we look at an ITIL service lifecycle, and that's a concept that comes from ITIL 3, if we were to go into an organization as a consulting group, a go-to group, we might see something that's pathed like this is a life cycle. And you see it's the traditional kind of workflow model of how we look at, say, for example, planning a product. If we decide we're going to buy or build, if it's build, it goes out to development. Development finishes their work. It's then an application support and operations. That's sort of where you see that DevOps group down there. And then internal support is looking to kind of keep the whole thing standing up and functioning properly. If we look at that from an ITIL 3, and you see 3 of the 5 models that come from ITIL 3 in this service value lifecycle, we would see service design at the top. We would see service transition moving down towards the development and app support area. And then, of course, service operation, where operations and internal support take place. Now, what's commonly done when we start looking at those guiding principles that we just saw on the previous slide, we begin to kind of unnaturally, or the temptation is to sort of draw those guiding principles and trying to tie them to each of these areas. So we may say, oh, well, product planning, they have a backlog. They're looking at where the value may exist. So we're trying to apply the principle of focusing on value to product planning. Or we may say, our development teams are practicing Scrum, so progressing iteratively with feedback. That sounds very Agile-esque. So we'll just make that application in the development area. Or with application support, we may say to ourselves, hey, we've stood up a service desk. So we're promoting visibility into our services and helping people get their services. That principle is applied there. Or with operations, we may say operations is one of their main goals is to automate as much as possible and deliver quick services there. So we'll tie that principle there. And then lastly, internal support, keeping the whole tripod sort of up. They're going to be thinking and working holistically. We want to get away from that and move into more of an integration model.
Yep, and integration and connectivity is crucial against all of those areas that you mentioned. And we have another definition, yet another one here. So Merriam-Webster defines integration, or basically says the definition of integration is coordination of mental processes into a normal, effective personality or with the environment. People, processes, and tools need to be as interwoven as ever in today's digital world. Modern ITSM is ever as much of a personality as everything else. Every area of the service organization touches each principle.
That's right. And ITIL 4 is supporting the big changes you made. And it's just a wording change. It's a simple wording change, but it really matters a lot when you really think about it. And we've renamed the processes to practices. When you think of the word process, you may think of a very linear or very workflow kind of model. In practice, sort of brings that up a little bit and makes it more of a thing you're going to be working on continually. It builds in that continuous improvement into everything. And you see the three key groupings of general, service, and technical, and then all of the practices that fall within. And there's a couple of ones that have changed names or been moved around a little bit. But really what we're trying to do is Jay mentioned, is build with that personality. ITIL 4 is helping us support more of an organizational personality versus that portion personality that we just saw in the life cycle a few slides back. So ITIL 4 introduces the service value system. You'll notice here we have opportunity and demand on the left, and we're driving through the service value chain that we'll take a deeper look at as well to bring out the value either to the customer externally or even value in how we are working interchangeably within what we're delivering internally as well. But those guiding principles sort of overarch everything. So they're applied in the service value chain. If we look more deeply into that, we see right here, again, the demand generation on the left. We're engaging with that demand generation, and through our products and services, that's where we're delivering the value. So instead of looking at this, what ITIL 4 is trying to do is make us look at things less as a life cycle and really look at thinking about these activities that take place in the middle here, the planning, the designing and transition, the delivering and supporting and obtaining and building, and making sure that planning is not just planning at the top through a backlog. Planning can be engaged in any part of what you're doing across any area.
And basically, through this integration and normalization, we see an effective and effective personality emerge. Basically, well, we're tuning things. And that brings us to our next topic, where we have been. Lessons we can learn from the past. And traditionally speaking, tickets escalate through tiers, but too much separation can basically work against the process. Enforcement model leads to an overly siloed team, which ends up thwarting cross-team collaboration between teams such as database admins, developers, engineers, and other teams. And although we're always adopting new technologies, legacy apps, which we'll talk a little bit more about that later on in the presentation, they almost always remain in place in some form or fashion, but they need to be accounted for, especially in process improvements. Knowledge management practices are not as mature as they need to be or should be. And, should we silo or should we not? There's, of course, benefits and cons to everything, just like this legacy way here. So when it comes to benefits, role separation is easier for new employees. Basically, if the employee, him or herself, has a legacy mindset, that just might be an easier thing for them to understand. But there's fewer gray areas that basically makes documentation easier as well. And that might sound good so far, but that brings us to the cons. And one of them is, well, team members may not feel as empowered to collaborate with other teams in a siloed environment, which could mean that a really killer feature for your service or your application may not ever see the light of day because maybe a team member is so siloed that they don't even really feel the need or the desire to make that known to people that can make these new features, get those implemented. And process improvements are less likely to take into consideration the bigger picture in a siloed environment. And this last point is especially egregious to me because creativity, in my opinion, that boosts job satisfaction and makes somebody happier at their job if they can leverage their ideas and their creativity. And too many restrictions can lead to less creativity and job satisfaction. Now, unifying processes by unifying teams. So as I was saying before, silos are easier to understand for those with a legacy mindset. And, too many silos can slow down innovation altogether. It's better to have each department contribute to the overall workflow, because again, there's a lot of great ideas in your organization that you might not even know are there, that someone has if they don't tell you, and they're less likely to tell you in such an environment. And it's better to have team managers and personnel to collaborate on pain points and processes and recommend improvements. I mean, it's one thing just to set something as a known problem and just work through it each time, but having the mindset that pain points should be addressed, fixed, streamlined, and anyone can collaborate on fixing those things will greatly impact the process. And here we get to contending with legacy applications and processes. This is especially important to me because in my role, I'm working with a lot of different systems, infrastructure, and as much as we hate to admit it, legacy apps and processes are here to stay for now because they're not very easy to get rid of. There usually needs to be a process in order to sunset those things, and it's not as easy as just turning off a light switch. And when it comes to security, security is very, very important, but especially with legacy apps because they're not getting security updates anymore, most likely. And if they are, they're probably going to charge you a premium to get those updates. So security is definitely a special consideration with legacy apps as well. And like I mentioned, we can't just immediately flip a switch and then the legacy apps go away. We would love it if it worked like that in the IT industry, but let's be honest, that's really not the way it goes. So although we can't immediately replace legacy systems, a plan of replacement still needs to be in effect. So you're not trying to get rid of a legacy app or move to a new platform at 0 hour after the vendor announces that support has ended. And again, in regards to security, legacy applications should have little exposure to networks because the smaller the platform for an application, the less likely it is to impact other things. Basically, legacy applications need to be controlled. We'd love them to go away, but since that's not going to happen, we really need to limit their access to networks, especially external networks. And legacy processes may be necessary, but we should always be looking at future improvements.
Okay, so where are we going as we move forward? Let's talk about the path forward. And let's start with a couple of things. First being monitoring. So your event and monitoring management practice. We've definitely, over the past few years, begun to take monitoring outside of, is application X or server X online or offline, and making that much more of a monitoring service. So we can ensure that basically value is being delivered all the way through for our customers. And in a few minutes, we'll take a look at Dynatrace as an example of that. That could fall into your availability management practice, or could be argued also falls into your event and monitoring practice as well. Also, when it comes to audits, a lot of times we set audits up and then we kind of very quickly enter into alert fatigue, where we say, okay, here's the same alert, comes every Monday at 9 a.m. or 5 a.m. People get they kind of tune them out after a while. So we want to make sure that we're auditing periodically to make sure the right alerts are going to the right people, because what might be relevant to one person at one point in time may no longer be relevant to them as you move forward and make changes in your practices and processes. So alert testing is critical here. And you want to make sure whatever you're using to consume your alerts, because hopefully you're not just doing alerts and event tracking, but you're also putting that into a tool that can do really solid notification. You want to make sure that heartbeats are built into that. So basically between the service and your responders that there's some activity that's always monitored to see. It's kind of like monitoring the monitor, so to speak. And there are tools that will let you have built-in heartbeats to make sure you have that going on. And lastly, as Jay talked about earlier with older ITIL, we were looking more as an enforcement model. The path forward in ITIL 4 is it's much more of an empowerment model. One example of this would be that change management, for example, under our services practices is now called change enablement. While we still factor in organizational change management, when we're looking at it from a specific service standpoint, though, that change management is now called change enablement. So some of you may have heard the term shift left. And basically what we're trying to do here in shifting left is making sure our customers or stakeholders we're moving our service requests or our incidents closer to them and away from the tiered approach that we see right here. So for example, as a ticket comes in, it may be like a level 1 type ticket, and we decide, oh, that needs to go to level 2. Or worse yet, we decide, oh, toss this over the fence for the service request and let's send that to another team. What can quickly happen there in the service request world is now that ticket is sort of essentially lost in the forest, and our mean time to resolution can get really squirrely really fast. So we want to move away from that model again in the shift left and get more into this type of scenario here where we see the sun coming out from behind the clouds. This happens to be one of the most beautiful places I've stayed out in near Moab, Utah, right on the Colorado River. And just a nice walk and saw this and really just struck me. But if we look at how we are seeing transparency of knowledge management and transparency of alerting, transparency in our knowledge management really is attuned to our customer, and the transparency in the alerting is really attuned to internal stakeholders, those on our team. And if we can do this correctly, we may even deflect tickets if you have a good service desk set up to help people come in and search for a particular service request, before that ticket is even entered, the customer has the response they need due to that transparency of the knowledge. Or if it's maybe an incident coming in, we can share that knowledge amongst the team. We're again going to reduce our mean time to resolution because we can quickly act on knowledge that's gone before us. Secondly, with change management, which we talked about earlier, we now call change enablement. We're really looking at redefining who the change authority is. So traditionally, we're all very familiar with CABs and change advisory boards, and they're still there, but we want to make sure that that delegation is taking place, and we're really thinking through and even building in change enablement throughout our development life cycle, throughout our operations life cycle. Anything that we're doing there, we want to make sure that delegation is taking place. And we're moving more away from a four-way stop model because it definitely has a slower throughput. And there's often stopping at an intersection where we're all familiar with, oh, no, stop. No, you go. No, you go. And you can kind of see how that works, and more accidents take place. So we want to get to the roundabout model. And while it does take a little bit of getting used to, once you have gone through a roundabout, it is probably about 20% more efficient than a four-way stop with less accidents. But you'll notice we have peer reviews in here. So security is brought into any changes as things are going on before it gets ready for a change to be made. And we definitely have the traffic cameras there to look over. And those traffic cameras really represent the cab. Still, to have oversight, they're still ultimately responsible for anything that takes place and changes. What's fun is if you've seen that show Mythbusters from a couple of years ago, they did a really neat study about roundabouts and four-way stops. So that might be a fun little thing to take a look at.
And when it comes to roundabouts, before we continue, I just want to mention, I think that's a great example of a process being implemented at a traditional IT company, because at first sight it looks like it's a new way of doing things. It might make people anxious. Maybe some people don't like change and they don't want to do the new way, but when they give it a chance and they look at how much more efficient it is and it's not really as bad as everyone thought, then people warm up to it and it becomes a success. So I think that was a really good example of how. So when it comes to automation, so now we're getting back into automation. It's critical. Automation is absolutely critical. If a process is time-consuming but predictable, it should be automated. And automation results in fewer human errors, because the more we have to do by hand, the bigger the chance is that we might fat finger something. I mean, I've worked with a company a long time ago that I can't name where a developer, when they wrote credit card machine software, put the decimal in the wrong place, and that every single person that went to a restaurant was automatically trying to approve $1 million tip, which would be a pretty darn expensive hamburger, And it was all just because of one human error that resulted in basically customers' credit cards being frozen. So automation definitely helps when it comes to keeping things sane and just predictable and fewer human errors. And that's also less time manually completing tasks and more time spent improving processes. I mean, can you imagine how much time you could spend in implementing a new solution or improving something with the amount of time that people just do a process manually in your workplace? You'd be surprised how much time you're losing by that. So you could definitely get some of your time back by automating some tedious, predictable processes. And when you have automated a process, it makes it that much easier to transform it into an offerable service, because maybe that solution that you are using internally that's really awesome and saves you a bunch of time, maybe that's something that other people outside of your organization can benefit from as well. And maybe you can actually turn that into something like a system, a process, a package that you can then sell to other people to basically increase your bottom line. Now, for that to work, collaboration is key. If each team identifies process bottlenecks and opens that up as a collaborative process improvement, the entire company benefits. Even someone in sales, for example, that doesn't normally get involved in IT might have some really good ideas, and even if he or she doesn't, there might be some things that they just wish worked better, was faster, and they can offer those improvements to the teams that can make it happen, pitch the ideas. By getting them involved in the collaboration process, you could actually benefit the entire company. And everyone wants faster response times, not just customers. Obviously, you want to deliver solutions quick, but if your admin needs a new system set up to do a proof of concept, and that person has to wait a week to get that, that's a week of lost productivity. So you definitely want to cut the response times internally and externally as well. And offering services requires an efficient workflow, and efficiency is gained only from process improvement. And every employee should be encouraged to participate in process improvement. Leveraging creativity, like I mentioned, enhances job satisfaction. So get everybody involved in what's going on at the company. Not only will they know what the company is up to, what everyone is working on, they might just have a solution or maybe even just a suggestion that would actually transform everything. Establishing a modern tool chain and workflow. And when it comes to establishing any workflow, you have to pick the right tools. And one of my pet peeves in IT is the mentality that some people have out there, where you learn to use a hammer, and now all of a sudden everything's a nail. You learn this new awesome, service or solution that you read about in a white paper. You know it backwards and forwards, and now you just want to implement it everywhere. But not every solution is going to work for every possible thing. It's all about using the right tool for the right job instead of forcing a tool to work for something it wasn't intended to work for in the first place. And you got to determine the proper tools to automate software building and server provisioning. And another thing that's important too is cost savings. And if you are implementing cost savings later on, you're going to find out the hard way that it's much harder to do that later than it is when you are actually implementing something nearer to the beginning. So definitely implement cost savings monitoring as early as you can, because if your employees are standing up $10,000 AWS servers, that'll definitely be a little bit painful. And you also should utilize tools to monitor for security risks. And that's very important because, I think every company wants to be on the news for the right reasons. No one wants to be the next Equifax. So definitely take security very seriously and utilize tools to monitor for security risks and make sure that the appropriate team that can take action on those types of things receives an alert if there's anything of concern. And also, it's recommended to pick tools that are cross-platform and easy to maintain. Maintaining multiple tools for the same general purpose is a waste. So, for example, you don't want to pick an automation tool that works only on one platform, because if your company pivots to a different platform, then it's going to be a lot harder to implement another solution. But if you have a cross-platform tool that works across multiple different platforms, and it makes your entire company basically easier to pivot to a new direction if you guys decide to go in a new direction.
Yeah, I think Jay, I think that's a really good point about the hammer and the nail. You mentioned that being a big pet peeve that you have. Just because you learn to use a hammer doesn't make everything a nail. I think that really fits into the keep things simple and practical guiding principle that we see in ITIL. Because what works in one capacity, like you just said there with cross-platform even, may not work in another capacity. So don't try to fit everything in a square peg, round hole kind of situation. We need to make sure we're following and thinking through that guiding principle. That's a really good point. Let's look at, from an incident perspective, let's look at a modern IT environment. And you'll see here a couple of, now we're getting away from the people and processes part of our talk today to talking more about the tool chain that we develop and put in place to facilitate these things. And we have a development stack here. We've got monitoring tools hooked into the IT dev stack, whether we're monitoring logs, whether we're doing synthetic transactional monitoring, whether we're just doing simple ping checks, whatever we're monitoring within there feeds out to Ops Genie as our alert management tool. So Ops Genie is there to keep things, it's basically consuming what's taking place from our alerts and then making sure that it does a notification, pardon me, out to the right people or right group of people or right person and reaching them across multiple devices. So we're ensuring no matter what that these people are notified. This might be traditionally through email, or it might be through a phone call or a text or all three of those. We can even throw these alerts out to our chat ops tools such as Slack or even Microsoft Teams. But basically with one click, they're able to go ahead and acknowledge that alert and begin to take action and begin to figure out what needs to take place to get this incident resolved or this alert resolved. And if they decide coming from the alert that an incident needs to be created, you can readily do that in Ops Genie. You could take it even further, and as Jay was talking earlier about automation, once you begin to mature the alert setup that you have, you can even automate some of those alerts looking for certain patterns and go ahead and automate the incident creation where need be and where necessary. Again, we want to be looking through that continually to see if we can do that automation. But let's say that we don't have that automation in place out of the gate. We can go ahead and have the responder acknowledge the alert and, if necessary, create the incident. Now, creating the incident also can feed in a incident request or an incident issue type in Jira Service Desk. And then we all know how we've all been there. We spend 25, 30% of our time dealing with, when you're dealing with fires, you're also dealing with communication out to your stakeholders or your external customers. And you're seeing a lot of more and more companies today throwing up a status page to make sure that these tools are integrated very cleanly to say, yes, we know about an incident with call recording, or we know about an incident on our website. And that way you'll sort of help deflect those things coming back into answer questions and really spend time on remediating the concern at hand. Now, between Jira Service Desk and Confluence is Atlassian's enterprise wiki tool. And a good practice here, particularly with incident management, is to go ahead and build run books for all of your services. So for each service, you've got what's taking place with the service, who the service owner is, even past tickets that have been created, past updates from your releases that have taken place on this service. You can all bubble that. You can bubble that information up in your run books. And then between the incident in Jira Service Desk and in Confluence, you can have that communication taking place. And all the while with your incident, you can bring people into the incident command center in Ops Genie or in a Slack channel or Teams channel and have that conversation to get this incident resolved. And then finally, in Ops Genie, you can go ahead and write out your post-incident review and move it through a workflow, have everybody collaborate on it. You'll have all your timeline of events that we'll see in a minute. I'll show you more details on that. And then publish that out for audit purposes. And if something that comes out of that audit is that you need to create a follow-up request for your software team, well, you can easily link the Jira Service Desk incident right out to Jira software and get an item into the software development team's backlog for work. Continuing a modern IT environment. environment. Here we're looking at a change enablement process. So we have developers working in Bitbucket, and code is being committed against and traced back to either bugs or request stories and whatnot in Jira software. And then Bamboo is handling all of our builds for what we typically would see to be standard change requests. We talked about earlier, the cab is there to sort of delegate that authority for changes. And so any change, when it's needed, is still tracked in Jira Service Desk, whether it be standard, normal, or emergency. We can still track that in Jira Service Desk. And then our cab, who's really there to say, well, now we know what not to do with changes, they can be monitoring those changes that are more normal and emergency type changes that we see here in the middle. That's the overlap we see there. For the most part, they're saying standard changes, here's what represents a standard change. It's been defined and agreed upon. We're going to let that take place because we have to move at that speed. That's that roundabout example that we saw earlier. And here in Confluence, our cab can easily take a look at the changes that have come into Jira Service Desk, and we can easily reflect those using a macro in Confluence to show, here are all the changes that are coming down the pipe, and we can review those in the cab meetings. And then finally, as we saw with the traffic cams earlier on our roundabout example, we're not losing sight of the cab's need to still overlook even standard changes. So anything that's an implementation should still be reviewed, whether it's through the cab or another delegated authority from the cab. But that implementation review does still need to take place, and we can do so directly in Confluence. Now let's take a look at Dynatrace, which is a tool to handle a lot of your alert management and a lot of your event tracking. In this case, we're talking about a synthetic transaction that's recorded, or real-time user monitoring, which is what RUM stands for. So Dynatrace RUM alerting to OpsGenie. I know a few years back, I worked at an organization where we did a lot of e-commerce work, and we had a lot of things taking place in legacy applications. So we're not talking about a web service transaction that might be 3 hops. We're talking like 32 various hops through multiple systems. So it's very important to know where any breakdown may take place, particularly when we were introducing changes. So what we would do is leverage a Dynatrace RUM alert to say, in the real-time user monitoring, we could have as you see here, a slowdown alert. So let's say over the span of 30 minutes, we're actually recording transactions, throwing them out on agents across the world, logging into the website, performing the transaction, and seeing what takes place. If things begin to slow, we may know that there's a potential problem coming down the line. So from Dynatrace, we throw out the alert to OpsGenie. As you can see here in OpsGenie, we have an open request, and then that is fed directly into Slack, where here in our chat ops, we could build other actions to like assign the alert to someone, take action on that alert even further. But the simplest way to show this here is just to acknowledge that alert. Once we've acknowledged that alert, you'll notice that now we go from open to acknowledged here. And if necessary, with one click, we can go ahead and create the incident directly from OpsGenie. And then we have the Incident Communication Center within OpsGenie, so we can go ahead and bring in responders. We can add a responder up here in the blue button, bring people into the conversation. Here we brought in a subject matter expert on this particular service to have that communication. And all the chat and the conversation is stored there for you to have in your follow-up and your post-implementation review. Now here, once the incident is resolved, we can go through and look in OpsGenie. We go down to our resolved incidents. We can see here where the website was experiencing slowness from that Dynatrace user monitoring alert, and we can click right into that. We can see the exact impact duration. We can see who the responders were, the incident commander and the subject matter expert, anybody else who was brought in, we can see them there. See any potential causes. We even have direct linkage out to Bitbucket if you want to set that up for code changes. And then we can look into our postmortem report and see that it's published. And go down and see all of the command center sessions that took place and when. and look at the full timeline to see like when status page was notified, when our people came into the command center. And then you have a templated view here, a templated way of setting up your post-implementation report so you keep things consistent, all your lessons learned and mitigation steps. And then we can attach out the post-incident analysis report here, where we can see the total time, were the stakeholders notified, when the incident actions took place, when the responders came into the conversation, collaboration sessions, and everything is all traced right there. Then finally, as I showed you earlier, the Jira software follow-up, if necessary, we can have that Jira ticket linked right into here and show, hey, this ticket here is linked into this service desk incident right there. And this ticket is readily available in the software team's backlog right up here. And then we have a label that this did come from OpsGenie. So full traceability, all from the incident taking place to the communication taking place to resolve the incident, all the way out to any software follow-up that may be needed by a team to better that service.
And in this slide, it basically all comes together when it comes to change enablement. So if you remember before, we had the roundabout example where we're encouraged to make changes. We want everyone's feedback. We want everyone to be a part of the process. And here we can see where we have been. If you look on the right, it shows recently completed change requests. We have a ticket for recabling the rack, migrating dev data to test, and so on. So right there, we can see what we have done, where we have been. And then at the bottom left corner, we can see where we are going. So these are pending standard changes, basically some things that we are looking into doing that aren't done yet, that we're currently working on to add value to our systems and our processes. And then in the upper left corner, we have some changes that are requiring CAB approval, because the change enablement doesn't imply that everybody gets to make whatever change he or she wants to make. I mean, and if an employee wants to put cute kittens on every single button on the application, I personally think that'd be awesome. But I don't really think that's going to be a professional thing that we really want to do in an application, unless your application is about cats. So we kind of want some approval so that employees just don't implement something that you're going to regret later. So some things will still need approval from a project maintainer or something like that to allow it to be approved to be in the pipeline. But people are still encouraged to be basically part of the process at every step. And there you have it. So basically,
all right, thanks,
I want to
see if.
Yeah.
Oh,
Go ahead.
I was just going to looking at questions, Jay. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to thank everyone for being a part of the presentation and hanging out with us, so we could definitely take a look at some of the questions here.
Yeah, let's see what we have here. We have one question. Atlassian has Jira Core, Jira Software, and Jira Service Desk. What's the difference? Do we need all three products for service management? You need to take that one, Jay, or you want to take it?
Yeah, I have one right after you. Yep, go right ahead.
Okay. So yeah, with Jira Core, Jira Software, and Jira Service Desk, yeah, you're right. Atlassian does have those three products. To deliver service management end to end, you definitely want to consider those. Jira Service Desk gives you a couple more things than Jira Software gives you. Like you have a customer portal, service level agreements. You have queues that can be set up to help push tickets to the right people. And it really gives you more of a service view. But you may still want to consider Jira Software if you're trying to be holistic in your approach, just to make sure that, because there's such a tight integration between those tools, they're just really nicely integrated. Really, all three would be recommended for your service management solution.
And speaking of integration, we had a question asking, how easy is it to integrate Jira Service Desk with Slack? So basically, if there's a ticket or a notification regarding a ticket, you'll see in Slack when a user creates an issue or there's any kinds of changes or anything like that. That's extremely easy to do. I think it took my team less than 10 minutes to integrate it. It's literally just an API key, and you just create that API key. There's also what's called a webhook, and that's what you put in Slack, and Slack has some built-in support. That'll be probably one of the quickest things you would do in this entire process. Very easy.
Great.
Let's see what else.
Let's see.
Shy, everyone, go ahead and ask your question.
Here's one. Can you give us some examples of different approaches to on-call management that can be set up in Opsgenie? Yes. Basically, you have this. Once you've mapped out your services, and I definitely recommend making sure you periodically review your service catalog is a living, breathing document. So make sure that you're always evaluating what that service catalog looks like. And then in Opsgenie, once you have those mapped out, wherever you keep those, whether it be Confluence or a Word doc or SharePoint, wherever it might be, just make sure you map those into Opsgenie, because then you can build in either who the responder should be or which team owns that. And then you can also be more holistic in it, add other teams in as secondary. Basically, they're notified as well. So anytime, once you set that service up, you can then link that and tie that to who the responders are.
Yep. Another thing about that too is Opsgenie has a bunch of integrations. It's actually very impressive how many integrations that they have. So, I mean, the legacy mindset could be, well, to get this alert by email, why don't we just have that sent by email to Opsgenie? No. Actually, if you look at the integrations, anything you want to integrate, I bet you anything, there's probably an integration already. So definitely use the integrations that are built into Opsgenie anytime they're available. Definitely check that out.
Let's see. One here. We're evaluating some ITSM tools that include ServiceNow and Atlassian's Jira Service Desk solution. Could you please give us some tips on what would be specifically looked out for in evaluating these tools? I think the big thing there, anytime you're evaluating any type of tool to put into place in your organization, you want to look at the total cost of ownership, the TCO, because over time, what may look like either cheap on licensing or look really easy to integrate, you want to make sure that every bit of the process, from the licensing through the implementation costs, through the upkeep and the maintenance costs, all those things are taken into account. Also, how quickly your teams can begin to use the tools. And if you need to make changes down the line, which you inevitably will, what are going to be the costs to get those changes in place? Will it be heavy consulting costs, or is it something that with proper training you can look at and make, maybe make on your own or make some simple configuration changes? Those are some things to make sure you look out for when you're assessing any tool.
Yep, and in addition to that, when it comes to implementing users, this is a very common question to get, which is, let's just say, I have 500 users in my company, and of those, I want 200 users to use Jira, so I need 200 licenses there. But then I might have tens or hundreds of thousands of customers. And you definitely don't want to use the same user database for your customers as you do your internal users, because you don't need 10,000 licenses. Definitely go into it with the mindset that your outside users or purchasers of your software or your services are kept separate from your internal users, so you're not spending licenses that you don't really need to.
Okay. What about Dynatrace? The question's asked here, what about using Dynatrace shift left during testing, performance testing to gain leverage and insight? That's a great use case. I've actually used that. The examples I was talking about earlier with the e-com site, where we were using it to track performance on the e-com site. We use something similar to that, basically the same concept, same setup, to in our performance testing. You could begin to scale. You could actually write, we're going to simulate 5,000 users. We're going to simulate 10,000 users. We're going to simulate 15,000 users, and sort of begin to see where the performance on your application drops off. So that's a great way to do that. you can do things like that within Dynatrace.
So another question that was asked. Yeah, I was going to say, I saw another one here, basically asking Jira Service Desk, can be used to manage incidents, problems, changes, service requests, and release management. And I also set it up for non-help desk related processes, such as information security management and capacity management. Yes, absolutely. There's some awesome integrations out there. I've even seen some that can, if you approve an AWS implementation, for example, that it'll actually build it for you. Like, you don't even have to log into the AWS console. I think the only limit is really your imagination when it comes to basically these integrations. And in my team, we even use it to track purchases, for example. Like, someone can put in a request and it can be approved for a piece of software or maybe a laptop or something like that. And we just recently built in a change request page or issue type as well. So basically we use the same thing, just basically looking for approval to get a change made to an internal system so that there's a paper trail for basically all the changes that are made to the environment. So yeah, the only limit is really your imagination. There's all kinds of integrations and there's some awesome ways to use it.
Here's another question here about, looks like it's about Confluence. We intend to provide our customers a knowledge base to solve common problems without raising a ticket. Yay, that's a good thing, because we were talking about that knowledge transparency earlier. Do you need to build an integration to link Jira Service Desk site to a Confluence knowledge base? That's a very simple, there's no major integration you need to build because they're both Atlassian tools. That linkage is literally basically, once you build the application link between Confluence and Jira, you tell the Jira Service Desk project which space to use for the knowledge base, and you've got your knowledge base linked in automatically. It's literally a 10-minute process. Okay, let's see. Based on your experience, how long does it take to implement ITIL in a medium to large enterprise? That's a trick question, because really the neat thing there is you've got, with ITIL, it's an ever-evolving thing. And we talked about practices and processes. We've seen a lot of people say, well, I have my incident management process in place, so I'm doing ITIL. Really, you want to be looking at it more as all your practices, so you're never really full grown. You should always be evolving. From a standpoint of what we like to say is get started, start where you are, use that guiding principle, and begin from there. Sort of very simply say, we're going to tackle knowledge management, we're going to tackle change enablement, and just pick which practices really, maybe from your executive level down, really feel like need to be addressed as pain points. Start there and continue forward, but you're always going to be in an evolution.
Looking through the questions here, and don't be shy, definitely ask us if you have anything you'd like to know more about. We've answered most of them already, if not all of them so far. See anything else new?
There's one more here about combining ITIL 4 with other frameworks. Absolutely. Combine it like COVID, for example. You're really looking at they're overlapping, and they should kind of augment one another. So it is possible to combine those frameworks. Absolutely. I think that's getting through them, Jay, is it?
Yeah, I'm not seeing very many other ones here. We've gone through those. So I think we still have a few minutes left if anyone wants to sneak in a question last minute. So one question I see here, can you give us some examples of different approaches to on-call management that can be set up in OpsGenie? That kind of depends on the organization and what the needs are. But it could be as simple as having an on-call rotation, and then it just cycles from one person to the next. You could do something like have a actual phone number that is tied to your on-call team that automatically gets routed to the appropriate person depending on who's on call. And you can also integrate that with something like Zabbix, Nagios, or whatever your monitoring system happens to be. So that way, with that integration, if a problem, for example, gets solved or is fixed in some way, then it automatically closes that in Opsgenie so it's seamless. Because what you don't want is to have to acknowledge and then resolve in one system, and then go and acknowledge and resolve in the other. It's better if they are integrated, so you can actually integrate it right with your monitoring system. So that way, when the solution is found and the problem is resolved, it's going to be marked green in all the different locations. So, there's a lot of different things you can do. Like I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of integrations in Opsgenie. It's staggering how many. I think there's quite a few in there. Yeah, I'm not seeing anything else. So
Yeah, good.
that's pretty much all of them.
All right,
Been a
I
lot
guess
of fun,
that will.
Jay. Thanks.
Great job, guys. I guess that will end our event for today. I would like to thank both Jay LaCroix and Hal Prather for their time, and GoTo Group for sponsoring this web seminar. And of course, thanks to all of you in the audience too for spending this hour with us today. So everybody have a great day, and we hope to see you at a future event.
Thank you.